It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to this workshop on cloud governance. This has been a joint, I would say, idea and efforts by two European institutions to put in place this exercise. We're very happy to welcome you. I'm your improvised moderator today. I was not supposed to be here, but for some reasons I do, so I hope that I will do my job properly. I would like to, before presenting you, introducing the various panelists that are going to intervene on these very challenging issues on cloud, which raises as much hopes and opportunities as fears and doubts. I'd like to welcome also two additional members of the European Parliament here present, Teresa Rieja Madurell and Sabine Verheyen. They want to, of course, take the floor. The idea is to give 5 minutes to each panelist to intervene, while the idea is to get from them some thoughts and some, I would say, suggestion about what, in their view, is the main challenges, the main challenge, 1, 2 eventually, and if possible, give us an attempt of priority actions that could be associated to those challenges. Following those presentations, as I say, I repeat, no more than 5 minutes to save the cloud. I would ask the audience to ask a question, of course, to ask a question, but also to make eventually statements on what they think the challenges are, reaction to the intervention from the panelists, and questions. So our first panelist today is Kasia Similevich, almost perfect pronunciation. She's the executive director of Panopticon Foundation. She will probably explain to you, but a bit better, the scope and the objective of this foundation. We'll have to follow Megan Richard. She's a director at the European Commission, DG Information Society. She was my boss. She's so I have to behave. And but for once, I'm controlling her. We have beside Megan Pilar del Castillo. She's an honorable member of the European Parliament. She's the coordinator of the EPP group. She has been the mother, I would say, of the digital agenda in the European Parliament. She has been very helpful in helping all the institutions to get this project through. We have Andrea Renda from the Center of European Policy Studies, Jeremy Malcolm that just joined us. We were a bit worried to have the consumer view represented, because we have, after two important business organizations represented with Mr. Kater Natani from Microsoft, as well as Patrick Ryan from Google. So I would maybe, ladies first, give the floor to Kasia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm honestly surprised that as the only civil society representative I get the floor first. Usually it's the opposite. Thank you very much. My organization, indeed works in a human rights area. We try to defend human rights in the context of modern technologies. We take a lot of interest in privacy, freedom of expression, right to information, and so on. We work both in Poland and at the EU level, so sometimes we have the pleasure of meeting European Commission and convincing them to look at privacy and freedom even more seriously. So unsurprisingly, I will tell you about the threats and the risks related to the cloud. I don't think there is a need in that room to introduce cloud computing as such and say that vast amounts of our data, including very sensitive data, move extensively into the cloud, which is obviously great for business purposes. It's great for the users, for their comfort of their life and their mobility, but it does pose new risks. And I would like to look at two aspects in my short time. The first one is privacy risks that result from the cloud in itself and how the cloud providers operate. And the second aspect is the risks that result from the government obtaining access to the cloud and the issue of data sovereignty. Privacy in the cloud. What main problems we have identified as a civil society organization? First thing is that we do trust a lot of data to entities that are commercial. The incentives of cloud providers are commercial incentives, which we have to bear in mind. That essentially means that our data might be used for, well, there is incentive, okay, so to say, that our data will be used for other purposes than end user normally imagines. I'm thinking especially about profiling and the risk of creating detailed profiles of individuals that might be used to generate more income, to generate advertising, and so on and so forth. It's a very worrying phenomenon, mostly because not many people know about it, and users entrust this data without full awareness of what might happen behind the screen, so to say. Another issue is that, well, we entrust our data to the provider that has actually exclusive control over the terms of use of the service, especially if the service is provided without payment. So-called free services that we often pay for with our privacy, and there is no well, possibility for the user to object changes in terms of the service, even if the changes are significant. The only way forward we have is to leave the service, which obviously we can do, but then comes another issue, which is data ownership and data portability. To what extent the service enables us to take the data and go somewhere else, especially if the data includes our conversations, interactions with other users. Things are getting very complicated. So that's a serious thing to be addressed, and I'm sure we will talk about that later. Then, of course, data security is an obvious issue we cannot ignore. Data security decreases in the cloud for many reasons. One being that a cloud provider is not a monolith. Do we trust its employees? Do we trust contractors? Do we trust the whole entity? How much we know about the entity? Do we know how many entities are involved in providing the actual cloud we use? I think all these questions are often left without answers, and the users might feel that security of the data is threatened. Another aspect which we hear a lot recently is, of course, attacks from hackers and other malicious sources that want to take control over our data. This is, as we see, not something we can prevent. I mean, even the best security systems tend to have holes which tend to get used by some other people. So the more data is stored in one place, the higher the risk. This is another issue to be considered, maybe with leaving data with the user and having some other models of storing data, not making it so centralized. So that's something I would like to discuss at a later point. Finally, there is cross-border aspect of cloud computing. More and more we see it's actually getting ubiquitous that the data gets sent somewhere else. We do not know where physically the data is being processed. And obviously companies have economic incentives to outsource data processing to other countries. Thinking about European companies, we also talk about sending data to third countries, which might be cheaper, but not always offer the same standards of data protection. We have the concept of safe harbor with the US, but the concept seems to be very flawed, and it's just commercial agreement which does not offer a real guarantee of protection. Users might not have the same rights in the other state because they are not citizens. So we have many implications of this cross-border aspect. 5 minutes. Okay, finished.
No,
I can finish. Okay, so then very briefly, the other aspect is the government access. If we store data in the cloud, which is in different country, we also face the issue of governmental access. Talking about, we are not supposed to name countries, but there is a country famous for war on terror and security laws, which also has the law which enables unauthorized access to non-citizen data. It is an issue, we have to address it because it's a data sovereignty issue. Thank you.
I don't know. Yes, it works. Megan, thank you.
Thank you very much. I won't speak for very long because I think it's more interesting to hear some of the questions and ideas from the audience as well, and of course from the other panelists. But I would like to start by explaining a little bit where we are in the European Commission on developing a European cloud strategy, which we expect to have finalized by the end of next year. By its very definition, I think cloud computing has many advantages for growth, for development, for SMEs, for users. You will probably all know what those many advantages are. And with all new technologies and new manners and means of using things. You can't hear. How about that? I move the mic to me. For all those reasons, this is an area where we have great potential for growth, but also, like every other new technology or new activity, other risks. But many of the risks and many of the problems that have been identified, I think, are also advantages or should be turned around into advantages for new types of providers, providers who can guarantee security, providers who can guarantee data protection for that particular jurisdiction, governments who want to ensure that their countries are cloud friendly will, I'm sure, be less invasive in terms of taking data from users, etc. So there are many, many advantages, and I think we also shouldn't forget that cloud, in some ways, even though it has special characteristics and special requirements, has many of the similar problems or issues that arise in other areas that we use on the internet. So you know, I'm sure, about many of those. So what are we doing in the European Commission about this? We have, in good IGF fashion, developed a multi-stakeholder consultation. We are consulting broadly and widely on what are the issues that are of particular interest in Europe for ensuring that Europe is both cloud friendly and cloud active. We want to make sure that there's as level a playing field as is possible for providers. We want to make sure that users of cloud in Europe have the right guarantees and interests that they have anywhere else. And to do this, we have launched a public consultation which closed on the 31st of August when we got 538 responses to this. We've done an initial analysis of this review. We have had a special meeting between Commissioner Kroes, who you may have seen speak yesterday at the opening session, and some of the senior industrial representatives, and those were from around the world. And that group of senior industrial interested parties, let's say, both from the provider side and from the user side, have identified 4 main areas where they are continuing to work and coming up with some recommendations. And we will continue our consultations with SMEs, consumer interest groups, etc., etc. So I hope that in reaching out and getting these responses from as many participants and as many interested parties as we can, we will be able to, by the end of next year, come up with something that is quite solid. And of course, I can't forget that we also discuss very much with the European Parliament and the member states as well on these issues. So I don't want to spend too much more time, except to add that in the context of cloud computing, of course, the international element is extremely important. And I think an area that we mustn't forget, which has international implications too, is standardization. And as I speak, there is a meeting going on right now between 2 of the main standardization organizations, one in Europe and one in America, to discuss specifically where are the areas that need greater, better, improved standardization on cloud services. So that's another element that, of the many, many that have to be covered in cloud, that I wanted to mention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Megan. I give the floor to Pilar. Thank you.
Let's see, I can use that. Well, thank you very much, Enrico. I am also to be very brief because, you know, we have always a risk in dealing with cloud computing that each of us, we can go through the same catalog of problems, so to say, and then we review everything, data protection, security, privacy, and, you know, so and so and so and so. So I have to pick up to make some option, to make some choice. I have to pick up some aspect with, in particular, worry me more, and I'm going to do that. And for me, one thing that has to be especially taken into account is anything related to a competitive cloud market, a market in which we have real competition, which is an open market, and then guarantee the freedom of choice of the users. That's extremely important. We want really to have a vibrant and and a strong cloud market. And in doing that, I think one of the aspects that we should look more for is all things related to portability. We cannot be, as we were in many countries at least, as we were in the past, that in the mobile sector, portability was offered to you if you are a kind of prisoner of the offer of the cloud you are, so to say. No? So I think when we are talking about portability, we immediately talking about standardization. And we have to deal with these. Standards is one of the aspects which can really hamper more the possibility of having such open markets. If we don't address the problem of standardization, and I am not a technician in that sense, so I just put in, the concept and the consequences there, then it's going to be more difficult, if not impossible, to really have such a flexible and quick system in which anyone can change or make another option if he's not happy with the service of his or her cloud provider. So I will say that is, for me, one of the aspects we should be in part of the core of the problems when we are now facing that. That means that some kind of international agreement on standardization should be put into place. I am aware that when we are thinking in standardization, we have to be careful in order not to hamper innovation in the field of the ICTs. We cannot really close the possibilities of new development in technology in this sector, but taking into account this at the same time, we need a kind of common standards that make possible, among other things, it's not only that factor, but that really boost for having a competitive and open market in the cloud scenario or in the cloud environment. So that is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm giving now the floor to Andrea.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Enrico. Thanks also to the organizers of this session for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be able to share my thoughts on cloud governance together with all of you and hear what the other panelists and the audience will have to say about this. I confess that I've been struggling a little bit with the idea of finding one main challenge for cloud computing. I've been thinking about a number of things because this has been what the overall instruction that each panelist has been given before this workshop. And I thought, of course, a lot of people say privacy. And for me, it's not the main challenge because it comes as an ingredient of a sustainable, let's say, architecture for cloud computing. Security, perhaps, well, there's a lot of diverging views. There's a lot of people that actually think that security would increase with a transition toward more massive use of cloud computing. It could be something like increased need for minimum quality of service to guarantee stability and resilience of the systems or the services provided through the cloud. And this is part of also, in my opinion, of the cocktail that we actually need to when we look at the cloud. It could be certainly interoperability, but this looks mostly at the application layer of the cloud. So what I think we actually need is to look at the governance of the cloud and the potential policy approaches towards the cloud in a layered way. So we have to look at the whole value chain to see if we actually have in place the right dynamics, not necessarily the right policies. There might be no policy at all. The right dynamics in the market that would lead to an emergence of a real cloud computing environment that is an enhanced environment on top of the one we already have, because we already live in the age of cloud computing to a large extent. And the layered approach means that we look at all the layers. And the layers of what, well, I'm Italian, but I will quote the UK regulator in this respect. What the UK regulator is defined as the lasagna model of telecommunications, which meaning moving from the spaghetti model, where each network was reaching each user, to a system where all the different technologies reach and bring the users on the same internet environment. And we're actually living in a situation where there is a transition towards what could be called the cloud lasagna, or a cloud moussaka, or whatever, since we are in times where we need to support Greece. So whatever, a layered environment where every layer is an essential ingredient for the working of the system. Very simple example, there's no cloud environment, there's no really resilient and perfectly working cloud environment without a high-speed infrastructure that is also a stable one, right? And currently, not only in Europe, but almost everywhere around the world, the infrastructure endowment is not sufficient to guarantee the quality of service that a massive transition toward cloud computing would require. And this is also something that I throw on the table, because I think that before we reach the cloud computing era, as has been evoked several times, we need to provide the right incentives for those that will deploy the infrastructure to actually invest in infrastructure. There are problems at the same time in the logical layer. There has been a long battle for net neutrality, and I think there's more emerging consensus now on the fact that some degree of traffic management can take place, provided that there are basic rights and key principles that are respected. Now, if you think about cloud computing and the fact that a lot of those, the cloud provided services, especially when platform as a service, for example, or infrastructure as a service, they would lead to a requirement of minimum quality of service, then it becomes very difficult to imagine completely dumb pipes coupled with cloud computing. There's an even more important issue here, is the fact that we risk the creation of an environment where a number of players would invest money to create a high-speed infrastructure, but it would be other players that would mostly monetize and would mostly reap those benefits. It's the ones that provide cloud services, and these are mostly application layer champions. But we do have potential policy problems also at the application layer. Some have been already mentioned. For example, interoperability, or the possibility that some IT giant becomes dominant in the provision of cloud services and starts discriminating against other services. This is not necessarily something that will happen. I think that, well, there are very authoritative speakers here that probably have some ideas in this respect. But when a player becomes dominant, then there's mandatory, basically compulsory licensing and mandatory open access in this respect, and these are embedded in our competition rules. So in the application layer, we know that there's this sort of ghost of potential mandatory openness that might emerge, even wholesale access obligations that might emerge if we don't take policy from the right angle. Finally, of course, on the content layer, we do have all the problems of privacy and security that I don't go into because of lack of time, of course. Now, all this wrapping up, I think that we need to reconsider, and we also needed to reconsider before, I think. We need to reconsider our policy approach to this environment in a way that is more layered, and it's more smart, in the sense of smart regulation. What I see is that regulators are increasingly caught between a rock and a hard place in this respect, because when you look at the lower layers, issues become so technical that normally regulators and public policymakers are not able to be timely and speedy enough, and they will increasingly rely on self-regulation or co-regulation with technical agreement between players. Now, if you move in the higher layers and from local you become more global, national regulators or even EU regulators are not sufficient, don't have a sufficient coverage and competence, and this requires increasingly international cooperation. So what I would probably like to see, and this is my concluding statement before the chairman becomes nervous, what I would like to see, or perhaps in the future, is a bit more emphasis on multi-stakeholder or perhaps technical agreements between the different players at the lower layers, and global standards for privacy, and global standards for security, and even an insurance market for security-related issues on the cloud, at the higher layers. I don't know if it's possible, but I'll leave it to the audience and the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea, for this attempt of gastronomic translation of the cloud. I'm sure the French would find a millefeuille, a good wording for that, and it will help certainly the Commission to translate in all the languages its action plan. I will give the floor to Jeremy, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeremy Malcolm. I'm from Consumers International, which is a global federation of consumer groups. And for consumers, the cloud is potentially a real boon. Obviously, consumers benefit from the ability to access their music, their photos, their documents from any device, wherever they are. But Katarzyna from Panopticon was one of the first on the panel to explain the risks that go along with that. And some of the other panelists have also underlined those risks. And certainly, I agree with almost everything that the other panelists have said so far. So I won't have to talk about that, and I won't have to talk about the need for standardization, because that's been covered. So what I will talk about instead is the need to perhaps generate some soft law norms to cover consumers' interests in relation to cloud computing. And that's really what we're all about at the IGF, soft power, soft law. I think that when you're talking about something like cloud computing, which crosses national borders, it's a bit silly to rely only on national laws because, you know, when you travel, you want to be covered by a common set of principles, no matter where you are. So one of the soft law documents that we are very concerned with in the consumer movement is known as the United Nations Guidelines on Consumer Protection. Some of you may or may not have heard of this. It was first passed by consensus of the General Assembly in 1985, so it's just celebrated its 25th anniversary. And it was amended once in 1999 to cover sustainable consumption. But the other paragraphs of the existing guidelines are on traditional consumer issues such as product safety, labelling, information, consumer education. And as you can understand, internet-related issues are missing from the code because it hasn't been updated for so long. So what we're proposing as Consumers International is that the United Nations guidelines should be amended to bring it up to date, to include some issues that are relevant to consumers in the information society. And so we have embarked on a process to suggest some amendments. We began this in an internal working group of Consumers International members who took a few months to do a set of draft provisions. We then took that to an open meeting in Hong Kong earlier this year and sat around in some small table groups and went over the amendments with a fine-tooth comb, and we ended up improving them, removing some, adding some others. And that then went to a public comment period, which took 3 months and has just ended, in fact, last month. So if you're interested in what we came up with, you can have a look on our website at a2knetwork.org/guidelines. But there are two particular sets of amendments to the guidelines that are very relevant to cloud computing. And I have asked for one of those to be put up on the screen. I'm not sure if that's been possible or not. Let's just wait a minute or two. I could just read them out, but that's going to be a last resort. Is it going to be possible to?
I think we'll
working on that. Okay. Well, what I will do is not start with that one. I'll start with the other one because, as I said, there are two provisions. So let's start with the other one. The other one that we're not going to see on the screen is about what happens when things go wrong. So it says, and I hope you'll excuse me if I do just read it, it says business and governments should apply data minimization practices and use effective and updated technology to protect confidential personal data against unauthorized use. Those affected by any personal data breach must be promptly notified of the details of the breach and of the available means of redress. The content of consumers' communications online must not be intercepted by governments or third parties without a valid court order. So as you can see, this principle, it's not going to be a law. It's going to be a guideline for governments to follow. But this particular one is about what happens when things go wrong, what happens when consumers' information on the cloud is leaked. So the correct response is to cooperate, to give full disclosure to consumers, and not to try and hush things up. Should I go ahead and okay, while they're still while they're still working on that, I should say that these guidelines have been relatively the earlier set of guidelines that are already in place have been quite influential, and a number of countries have based their consumer laws around these guidelines. So although we don't want to have a binding instrument, this does have the potential to be very persuasive, let's say. So given that there is some trouble in bringing up the other provision, let me just read it, because it will come up on the screen anyway. That will be the end. Governments and industry should support, use and contribute to the development of open and interoperable standards for works supplied to or hosted for consumers in digital formats. Suppliers who provide a service to host such works online, other than a content streaming service, should also provide the means for consumers to extract those works from online storage by that supplier using open formats and protocols. So that's quite a different provision, which says, look, if you're hosting my information online, except as a streaming service, but if it's a service like a cloud service that I'm supposed to be able to access, I should be able to extract that information in open formats and protocols. So we think if these two provisions were to find their way into a soft law instrument, that would be a beneficial standard that both industry and governments around the world could have reference to when trying to design their national cloud computing policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, and I'm be curious later, maybe in the intervention, if there would be any representative of any member state that would tell us how this is possible to get into the sort of soft law, some inputs of this kind, because it's very important also to understand how this consideration can be translated into the reality of the policy making. I'm giving the floor to Nasser. Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity, and you know, to have the private sector part of the table, especially cloud providers. So I was thinking about the what will be the challenge, the one thing that we need to pick up, which is very difficult, as everybody said. And I was talking to when I received the invitation to speak to the topic, I was saying everybody will talk to data sovereignty and security and privacy. So what is the one thing that I would pick up? And I come up to realize that I think the most challenging thing around cloud governance is actually cloud governance itself, because it's I believe is a very difficult topic to deal with, and I just to want to elaborate on that because I agree with so many things that have been said, not everything, but so many things that have been said. So I think I'm not going back into the the advantages of cloud. I think a lot of people have know. I just want to mention one or two which I believe are fundamentally important, which are around the opportunities for more innovation and growth and more job creations yet to come. I think we haven't yet tapped into the opportunities and the innovations that cloud computing is enabling today. And yet cloud it's not something new, right? So the concepts have been here for a while. I mean, I was amazed by your example, Patrick, this morning when you mentioned that when we started using internet, I had an email service from CompuServe 20 or 5 years ago, and these problems has been there since 25 years ago. So nothing is new really, in fact. And but the reality is now it's exacerbated with the with the scale and the amount of data, etc. So in a sense, everybody is actually, whether it's a government, whether it's a consumer, whether it's an enterprise, every time we deal with these things, in fact, we're making trade-offs. We have to do trade-offs. I mean, as a user, as a consumer, when I go online and use an email service for free or anything, what I do is I know I'm making trade-offs, right, on certain things. I get it for free, but on the other hand, I know, or I should know, and I want to know. And I'm asking my vendors to tell me everything about what they do with my data. So I want to be, I want to be in control. I want to know all the privacy policies and certainly all security policies around that. So, and then there is that kind of turn down. On the other extreme, governments and organizations, customers, they also want to some sort of they are making trade-offs because some government entities or some government organizations might say, you know what, the cost, or the value, in fact, that I'm getting from that service does outpace the cost I have to go to pay for it. And so I can make that trade-off, knowing that and having enough transparency on certain things. Again, as you mentioned, around the issues around data sovereignty and privacy and security and so forth. And the other thing I want to keep in mind, us to keep in mind, is there are countries around the world that can really leapfrog in terms of how they can leverage cloud computing today and go to a next level of productivity and a next level of innovation, and so as they're themselves thinking about cloud policies, they need to think about the trade-offs on that front and what the benefits are for them as they they go there. So so for me, I know it's what I fundamentally believe is we are in a nascent, from a trend perspective, from a transformation perspective, we are in a nascent paradigm shift, and the kind of things that we can do with cloud is amazing. I was yesterday having dinner with an innovator. I'm not sure he's here, Remy Caron, and he's done an amazing job. You're there, and he's done an amazing job thinking about using cloud computing in disruptive ways. And what he has done is actually, I know he can speak better than I do, but basically using sensors in cows, capturing a lot of immense data about cows' health, and then being able to, thanks to cloud technology, being able to deliver information about their health, about so many other things, to the farmers, so they can act, in real time. And that has not been something possible in the past. And these kind of the innovations, I would like us to think that this is the future. And as we build cloud governance, regardless of what we do, we need to keep in mind that these are the things that we really need to be thinking about and enabling these innovations and not preventing them, because I know that he has gone through a lot of policy and privacy challenges in a sense, and we don't want that. We want to protect that sort of, and enable and having policies that enable that. So the reason I selected this theme is of saying the biggest challenge of cloud governance is actually cloud governance itself, is because we want to make sure that we are making trade-offs. I mean, just to pick on the standardization aspect, I've spent years and years on standardization, and I know what time it takes to be the standard, right? It can take 3, 4, 5 years to build a standard. The reality is, technology is going even faster, right? And how can we build standards today in a field that we just don't know? We just don't understand all the implications. So I leave it there with this, with this thought that yes, we need cloud governance. We need to protect, consumers. We need to protect governments, etc. But at the same time, let's make sure that we build flexible frameworks that enable, innovators to keep innovator, small ones, and of course the large ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I give the floor to our last panelist, Patrick.
Thank you very much. My name is Patrick Ryan. I'm Policy Counsel, Open Internet for Google. One of the products that I work on is on cloud computing, and I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you very much for inviting the private sector. I'm very happy to share the panel for a second time with a colleague from Microsoft, and this is a great opportunity to discuss things that are very important to us. cloud is obviously a great opportunity. One of the things that that a lot of people forget is that the cloud is the internet. There is some distinction that people are trying to make. In many ways, it's a marketing distinction these days about the cloud, but the cloud is the internet. Nasser mentioned that he had a CompuServe account 25 years ago, and I'm sure at some point everybody here had a perhaps a Hotmail account, in the 1990s, which was again just a nothing more than a cloud-based service, and you can do many of the things with Microsoft Hotmail that you can do with any of the other cloud services that are available today. This really isn't that new of a concept. It's just interacting on the internet with a new word. One of the biggest challenges that I see is this sort of concern that people have, and it's a legitimate concern, but it's one that I think can be aired through education, and that is this question of where data is. There's a lot of familiarity that people have with their old computers, the computers that they have with all of their data on their hard drives, enterprises that have mainframes in their offices. It's something that you can kick, you can feel, you can touch it, and the cloud is a little bit different because you can't go visit the data centers. You can't see where the cloud is. You can't see where the internet is, and that makes people nervous. Nicholas Carr wrote an excellent book a few years ago that made an analogy about and he looked at the movement from private electric systems to the public electrical grid. And I think there's a very interesting story there, right? There were a lot of industries that were far more comfortable with having their own power plants right next to them in order to be able to maintain manufacturing integrity. And then as the public power plants worldwide started to gain momentum, there was some resistance, but ultimately a switch over to the public power plant made a lot of people feel uncomfortable because, again, these industries had a lot of comfort and they had people and staff that maintained their local grids. It's an interesting sort of a European analogy that occurs to me. I received my PhD in Leuven, which is a small town, a university town in Belgium. And I just have a very special place in my heart for Belgium. But one of the fascinating things that I always noticed that when I would fly into Belgium at night is you can always tell when you're flying into Belgium because the whole country is lit at night, right? And why is that lit? Well, because there was a policy, back in the day where the European countries felt that, we each needed to have our own power plants. And so Belgium built its own nuclear power facility to power, a very small, wonderfully beautiful, love-it country of 10 million people, right? Now, does that make sense? In order to use that excess power, because you can't, use all the power at night, it's nuclear, you can't exactly turn it off, so Belgium built streetlights along all of the freeways throughout the entire country. Wonderful thing, it contributes to public safety. Not the most efficient use of energy, right? And that's in many ways the way the cloud is today. It's this recognition that you can do a lot more by embracing a broader grid. There's a lot of discussion here today, and I'm really excited about the soft law and these standards for operability and openness. There's a lot of opportunities here for policymakers in that regard, and I really applaud the work that civil society and the European Union is doing with this. It's not something I anticipated talking about, but it really is at the heart of what Google believes in. Google, it wasn't that long ago that Google was a company in a garage, right? And we were built on the idea of openness and data portability, and we wouldn't be able to have our services be adopted by others if there wasn't a certain amount of portability available. It's such a core philosophy for the company that we have a sort of an organization within the organization called the Data Liberation Front. And if you look up the website, it's dataliberation.org, and it's this sort of vision of it has a fist with a chain. It doesn't look googly at all. But the principle behind it is to make sure that every product within the Google product line has a data portability option so that users can take their data with them. They have a product that we launched called Google Takeout so that you can take your data with you at any time. The philosophy is that we want users to love us, but we don't want you to be locked in. And if you're ever frustrated with us, there's opportunities to take it, and it's a major organization. Every time a product is launched, it needs to pass the data liberation test in order to make sure that it is portable. Those rules are wonderful things, and can certainly enable an ecosystem and enable the next Google of tomorrow, hopefully from Europe. So that's it. I have one other just question that I think might be worth discussing since we're talking about standards. I'm very interested in the development of standards and security standards. You know, particularly in some of the work that's happening in Europe with ENISA. There's some development of standards with CAM, I believe, is a standard, and you know, ENISA has a checklist. You know, in parallel, we talked this morning a little bit about ISO and the ISO 27001 standards. Lots of opportunities here for independent, third-party, you know, tests that can be applied. I'd be very interested in any discussion, if it takes us there, about how those may play a role in the future, because we're listening and are very interested in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you were lucky because my chrono died, so you had maybe a little bit more. But I invite then everybody to ask a question or to make any relevant statement. I would take maybe the first question here. Yes.
Oh, my name is Remy Karen, and I'm the guy behind the cloud story. I've got another concern though. When I was listening to the opening statements, so to speak, there's a big focus on creating a competitive cloud market, and but the focus seems to be on the larger corporations that are actually driving the cloud itself, the platforms like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Salesforce, and whatnot. Typically, for me, as a small, medium-sized business, the cloud gives me the opportunity to actually be competitive with the bigger firms in the same space, and without the cloud I would not have been able to do so, right? So if I am doing a bid on a project, I used to lose to Capgemini or Society or whatever big guy because they are offering a full redundant data center storage to host the application for their customer. I would not be able to do that as a small, medium business. The cloud actually gives me that opportunity. So in all the regulations and all the corporate bindings and all the stuff that you're going to think of and policies that we need to have in place, I hope you also consider the smaller guy who's actually benefiting big time from the whole cloud initiative.
Anybody from the panel that wants to
Well, if I may, just to say that when I started speaking, I said how important it was for growth, how important it was for small and medium enterprises, etc. So in the European context at least, and I can't speak for everyone else around the table. Yeah, you can't hear me, sorry. In the European context at least, this is one of the elements that we're looking at particularly. I mean, I said too that we want to make sure that cloud providers and cloud users have the best possible circumstances and the best possible market. So you may be able to use a provider that suits you in one particular country that covers, I don't know, maybe your particular interest is security, and your provider will provide you with security, because this is the most important thing. If you lose your cows or your data about your cows, it will be a disaster. Someone else may be more interested in data protection. I mean, there are many different possibilities, and I think the potential for growth in cloud provision, as well as, of course, by definition, cloud use, is exponential. And if I can, since I got the floor, because like this, just a clarification on standards. When I said how important standardization is, and of course in the international context, I wasn't implying, I hope that wasn't understood, that we'll just standardize everything relating to cloud. That would be, first, impossible, second, unrealistic, third, it would stop everything point blank. We would never get any further because it would take us 5 years to, 20 years probably, to do everything. But there's certain elements and certain areas where standardization can lead us to a level playing field to improve things. So I'm sorry I didn't speak the whole 5 minutes at the beginning. So.
Thank you very much. I wanted anyway to come back to the standardization issue, because we're talking about standardization, but I think in a very broad sense. And maybe if we come back to the layer approach that Andrea was mentioning, we can maybe identify where the needs for standardization can apply. But Andrea wanted to, I think,
yeah, no, of course, there's always a bit of suspicion when you talk about standards and from an EU institution, because there's this reputation of being a sort of top-down standard advocate, standardization advocate, rather than a bottom-up. Well, actually, well-deserved, but but indeed, of course, there are two ways of seeing things. On the SMEs, I perfectly agree. I mean, nobody's denying. Perhaps we went all the other extreme. We didn't emphasize enough the benefits that the clouds, because everybody took them for granted, and we started looking at the challenges. What I think is important is not to confuse the the outstanding opportunities that the cloud platforms provide for SMEs, also in terms of not just new ideas, but also reducing the cost of using IT equipment, for example. And on the other hand, the overall competition that is emerging between platform, like cloud platform operators, let's say, platform providers. Meaning, for example, to keep it short, a lot of SMEs have been able to develop applications for the iPhone, iTunes, overall Apple platform. This doesn't mean that the Apple platform is the most open and interoperable in the world. Okay, that's just to clarify things.
Is there a reaction on this topic in particular?
Again, I don't want to seem, against standards. I just wanted to make the point that they take time. There is an amazing work going on right now, across the, ISO and, the NIST and European Commission, ITU, etc., various to really dig into what are the use cases, understand what needs to be standardized. And I think that's the fundamental. If we go through that path, understand first where the standards are needed, what are the scenarios, what are the use cases, and then we can decide from there, what needs to be standardized. That's the best way to do it.
Yes, can I mention this? Well, I mentioned strongly the aspect of the problem of portability and competition, because I think it's essential. I mean, it's very clear that we can get a lot of benefits from SMEs to yourself. I mean, this is a huge benefit, which we don't need to insist, as many of my colleagues said here. But I think we need the standards that we really need for making the interoperability a reality and making the portability a reality. If we don't get that, then we'll be in a market that will restrain the benefits for all users. And then that was my point. And in that sense, I know that, standardization can really hamper innovation. You close and you are inflexible, but then you have to really focus on where in order to get more competition in that market.
Thank you. Well, okay.
One of the biggest issues that I encountered in that whole cow story is the lack of data regulation. So I ran into issues where there are countries, member states in the EU that say anything you store that lives inside the borders of my country need to be stored on hardware within the borders of my country. So, and therefore, it's impossible almost to do stuff that I did with the cows. And if you go knocking on the door at the EU, go like, how is this regulated? Nobody seems to know. So what do? Do you go to every member state and figure it out yourself, awake the sleeping dog, or are you just going to do it? So instead of looking at the bigger picture, I think there's issues at hand that are currently not dealt with by the EU as such. And so data regulation, I think, or freedom of data travel, data Schengen, so to speak, would be very beneficial.
Thank you very much. I think we have a question here.
Thank you very much. Ian Fish, BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT in the UK. Sorry to move us away from what we've just been talking about because it's fascinating, but I want to take us back to what NASA was saying about his wanting to know his trade-off remarks. And there are two points I'd like the panel to comment on. He basically said he wants to know what all the aspects of the other side of the bargain he's making when he puts his data online are. And there was an implication there that you could actually know this. And there has been some suggestions recently that this is not the case because of aggregation and time, that the other side of the bargain you actually don't know what it is, because it can go on aggregating information for some time, and even after you've left an organization in some cases, as has been shown recently, or you've left your side of the bargain. And the second point is that he wants to know what all the aspects of the other side of the bargain is, but I was in another panel this morning where a tweet came in from a young user, somebody interested enough to be tweeting on this particular issue, and said life's too short to look at terms of service, privacy, things and such like. Now I'm sure that's not just him or her. I'm sure there's an awful lot of people like that. So I'd just like some comment on that. Thank you.
I don't know who wants to start. reacting on this? Maybe an institutional reaction or a business reaction?
Okay, industry.
Yeah, well, it's a very complicated issue, and I consider myself a recovering telecom lawyer. So I'm probably not the best to talk about the values of contracts in terms of service, and you know, I'm hoping that I don't ever have to negotiate any more contracts or to draft them of that kind. There have been studies that were done, and I don't have the exact figures on hand that say that, you know, if the average user, I'm going to just make this up because it's, I think, close, that if the average user had actually read all of the terms of service for the number of websites that they use within a given year, it would take them 2 years of straight reading, right? That's a lot of reading, and they wouldn't have understood it, right? So, you know, I think you're absolutely right. There's a problem that needs to be fixed, it's a I think that's a great topic for another workshop.
And one of the issues that has come up in the public consultation, and of course primarily with the consultation with industry, with industry, is exactly the issues of liability and contract provisions. And of course no one is suggesting that there should be a standard contract for cloud provision, but there are many common interests and common areas where we know that generalized contractual ideas or generalized contractual provisions or a consumer's guide to, or something like that would be very helpful. So it's certainly one of the things that we're looking at. Put it close to you.
Thank you. I think with that question we tapped into the whole big debate on the privacy reform, which we are now expecting in the EU. It's a huge debate, and we won't go into details now, but when you say about the customer and the cloud entity relationship, I would say we can never leave that for negotiation between these parties. I mean, the imbalance is clear here. So what we really need is some strong principles that cannot be circumvented with consent. So meaning I agree to very long terms and conditions no matter I read them or not, which might change the other day, but we need principles like data minimization, like accountability, like proportionality, so all this old-fashioned talk, but unfortunately there is no other way forward, I believe, rather than state or other powerful entity limiting what cloud providers can do with the data. When you ask about privacy, I guess that's more for me, yes, provocative question. Of course, we do not know how the users will conceive their privacy in the next generation or how they conceive it now. But from our perspective, the problem is awareness and education. I do not think that users know enough what happens with their data and what the implications are. So maybe by talking privacy is not important to us. They just mean things like, I have nothing to hide. But this is not the main issue. The main issue is the manipulation and the balance of power that can happen, may happen in the market if we leave our data without any protection. So I would be careful with these statements just because people might not understand the full picture.
Thank you, Kasia. First Nasser, then Andrea.
I'm not, a lawyer. I'm a technologist, but I, kind of at the limits of technology and policy. We have set some principles in our company around these issues. One is we decided that we are not going to leave this discussion around privacy to the engineers. This is a discussion that is taking place by our privacy experts. And what we have done is we have built something that we call privacy by design, which is basically, as we build the product, we think privacy from the ground up for each and every product that we ship in the market. And that goes today across the board where people think about it. Let me just give you an example, because that shows that even in cases where people won't think about privacy, we actually think about it when we bring privacy experts. When we did Connect, which a lot of people have seen this camera where people can do gestures. And you can think about why Connect should have a privacy issue. The reality is there's a lot of technology in Connect around face recognition. And we built, because we have thought privacy by design from the beginning, we put our experts in place, and we have got the engineers think about how they actually address that problem by encrypting the images, etc., so that nobody can use that. right? And that we solve some of the problems there. So there is in order to address this problem, the first is there should be commitment and conviction that this is a problem and we need to protect customer data, whether it's consumers or enterprise, because I mean there are different. And then you build it from the engineering ground up. I think that's one way of addressing that. And the third thing is about how transparent we are about it. And transparency is not just by saying, you know, or read this, you know, 20 pages of contract, which basically look, is the same thing as an insurance contract, because that's another aspect, you know, banking or insurance or credits. Nobody reads them, right? And we don't know what we sign up for. I think what we need to be doing is to make these things very clear, very simple, straightforward for people to understand. So there's clarity and simplicity as well that needs to take place from our angle. At least this is the way we look into it.
Andrea.
Yeah. Very interesting question, because I think it's also a good example of how certain things can be approached in the relationship with end users. And I think in this respect, we do have like 40 years at least of literature on, academic literature on behavioral economics that tells us something about how consumers can actually approach the overflow of information. Right? Cyberspace is a typical environment where the wealth of information creates a poverty of attention. We cannot expect that the end user actually reads through everything as in the real world. So what I think is quite important in this respect is that simple tools that are sort of proxies for what is the compliance with basic standards, basic principles are developed, perhaps by the industry, for example, traffic lights or other forms of nudging people into more privacy compliant applications or softwares. Another typical application of this approach, which is grounded in behavioral economics, even in neuroeconomics to some respect, is to switch from opt-out mechanisms into opt-in mechanisms, where the end users actually have to make an informed choice before they actually decide to adhere to a specific scheme or specific treatment of data, before they decide to enter this trade-off. I think this is perhaps a bit of an easy path for those that live with organization of data. It is perhaps more of a guarantee for the end users overall.
Thank you, Andrea. I will take two questions from the floor. The first, three questions from the floor. The first would be from Senator Vincenzo Maria Vita, that I welcome here.
That's a little question. What do you think about the relation between skill economy and the market regulation?
Clarify a little bit. What do you mean?
Okay. So, no, the question is very simple. The clouding age has more problem and not less problem than the classic period of computer. Net neutrality, antitrust, this is the question.
I suppose that the question is about the balance between regulation and self-regulation. What is the balance? Anybody? Please.
Well, like all balances, it's delicate. Let's start with that basic principle. And I think that in an area that is developing so quickly, and as many of you know much better than I, as soon as you start establishing rules that are too restrictive or too limiting, you stop the development. I'm still convinced that innovators and developers and the youth of today is so, what's the word, innovative, I guess, and so quick that even if we establish a bunch of silly rules, they will find 20 ways to come around them and develop new technological solutions. But that's not the point. I think that we are in many areas, particularly in the European Commission and of course with the Parliament and member states, more and more wary of imposing regulatory provisions that are going to limit development and stop new paths. On the other hand, there are certain basic rights and requirements that have to be established, and that's where we usually draw the line. With respect to self-regulation and co-regulation, I mean, of course, there are many, many areas where these are extremely useful. I use one from my own area, for example, in the privacy impact assessment for radio frequency ID, which has been, for the moment, extremely useful. We're going to talk a little bit tomorrow about Internet of Things, an ad for workshop tomorrow. I mean, these are areas where self-regulation and co-regulation can really be very useful, and the cloud, of course, is another one.
Yes, this is an area that I think is a very good question, and it deserves a lot more study. It's something that we've spent a lot of time on, and in fact, this is one of the focus sort of messages that that Google has for the IGF this year, and that's, you know, figuring out what the value is of the internet economy. Cloud is the internet, right? It's one service on the internet. And we've spent a lot of time recently working with Boston Consulting Group and others to determine what is the value of the internet to an economy. And in fact, we have a website, google.com/events/IGF. I'll give you it. It's on the back of my card. We've published the studies that we have so far in this field. There's about 13 or 14 studies. Most of them are in Europe, and we've looked at, you know, the different types of policies and impacts that the internet, the different types of regulation could have on the internet economy. On the higher end are the companies like countries like the United Kingdom and the Nordic countries, which you know, have highly regulated sectors in many ways, but in the case of the internet are very hands-off relative to other countries in Europe. And we can, you know, see relatively the impact and the projected growth over the next 5 years of those economies. Those are studies that are relatively new, and we think that they're very powerful tools for policymakers in order to look at and analyze. I'd be happy to follow up with you on that afterwards.
Thank you very much. I don't know if Pilar, you wanted? No. There is a gentleman here that wanted to ask a question.
In fact, I was hesitating to ask the question. I am a lawyer from Afrinic, the African registry. And when our friend from Google said he is no longer in practice, no longer looks at contract, but I still do. I still earn my living from that. Then I said the points used about looking at the cloud computing service contract, do we consider it still as a normal classical IT service contract? Some people have raised the imbalance in terms of liabilities between the offer and those who buy the offer, imbalance in terms of obligations. If we continue looking at it from the classical sort of license agreement from Oracle, from all those providers, of course, the end user is always, he just opts in. He has no choice. But at the level of the EU, has there been any sort of study done or some reflection done to try and get the shift from the classical IT sort of service contract to, because it is a special service. It's not just putting equipment or running your equipment. There are more things to it. When we look at availability of services, who says that tomorrow if the service provider's ISP fails, who bears liability to my client down the line? Tomorrow if I buy something in the old days we were buying a software, we get a CD. I know I have a license. What do I get when I buy now? A pass-through thing? Nothing more than that. But I think there is something to protect the end user. If we want this industry to grow, we need to build confidence in those who want the service. And I think there must be some studies, or if there are, I don't know up to now, but we have got to revisit this contract so that it becomes a per se cloud computing contract instead of going by analogy to look at it from an IT perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would keep maybe the answer of 2 panelists because we have still 4 questions. Who wants to react very quickly?
Well, I think you asked in the context of the EU, if I'm not mistaken. Is that what you said? Well, anyway, now that I've got the floor, but it's one of the issues that is being looked at, and it's been raised by industry, it's been raised by consumer groups. It's certainly an issue that's absolutely essential, liability and contract provision. So I don't have the answer that yes, X is what it should say, or whether it should necessarily be opt-in or opt-out. But these are certainly the issues that we're looking at.
I think your question is correct, meaning there's although the EU is famous for having regulated almost everything on earth, in this case, and the debate on consumerism and consumer policy has been a very long one, a very thorough one in the EU since the 70s, the mid-70s, and then over the 90s. There are a few things, especially when it comes to so-called click-wrap contracts, that has not been fully tackled at the EU level. And there's been a big debate in the United States, especially in the 90s. I can point you at some papers that are quite interesting in this respect, and it led to some legislative reform. Paul Gomulkiewicz, for example, was writing a very interesting paper titled "The License is the Product," meaning that what you get is not the product itself because it's intangible, but it's a license to get access to that type of information, which is digitized. And all the legal consequences of this then have been partly transposed into legislative reform in the United States. In Europe, I think, despite the fact that the body of consumer legislation is expanding and very sophisticated, I think we still need to make the sort of bridge into the online world, and especially for the emerging cloud computing relationships.
Just very briefly, there is a new consumer protection directive which is going to take effect soon, and there are some new provisions in there which are somewhat relevant. For example, there's a provision that says if you purchase a product as a consumer which has DRM, digital rights management restrictions, or interoperability restrictions, then those have to be disclosed to the consumer. So that's actually a little bit relevant to the discussion here, and so take a look at that new EU Consumer Protection Directive if you're interested.
Thank you very much. There's a question here. Please ask for a quick answer.
Hi, my name is Mike Sachs. There's a tremendous amount of innovation happening in cloud computing, and people are doing things that have never been done before. They're inventing new products and new ways of doing things. So in that context, mandating operability sometimes doesn't really make sense, because if you're the only one who is doing something brand new, you know, making it operable is not only maybe impossible, but for a small company operating in that space, all the energy that's focused on making interoperable systems takes away from the ability to create innovative products. So I think it's maybe a little bit too early to start mandating operability, and even though that's an easy thing to do, maybe we should focus our mental energy on the harder problems, like harmonizing regulations regarding data security and privacy, so that the innovative SMEs can focus their energy and their money on creating new solutions for their customers, rather than having to hire lawyers to figure out what the right thing to do is in each country.
Okay.
Can I quickly?
Yes, please.
Just a quick point, not on operability because it's not my area, but on the second thing you mentioned, the privacy laws. If you think about Europe, then I do think, and we agree with the European Commission, there is harmonization, and we do not need much more here unless we want to reform the existing rules. If we talk about cross-border in the sense of, for example, US-EU issues, that's a huge challenge. We would love to harmonize it, but it's really not on our side. And from what we know, the US government does not conceive such possibility. So it's really not easy thing to do. It's definitely not easier than making systems interoperable, I'm afraid.
Well, can I just add one aspect, and that is that it's true that there is one directive, I know, not to be too long, on data protection in the European Union, but it has been applied in slightly different ways in some member states. There's no question about that. But it's under review right now, and I hope that with the new directive, recommendation, regulation, whatever it's going to be, some of those problems will evaporate.
I'll keep it in
Very quickly.
I will keep it in one sentence. The reason why I agree with you is that in the history of personal computing, we've seen that nation markets normally have this clash between different forms of architecture, open, semi-open, closed architecture. And after a while, we've always seen a push towards more openness over time. So that's why I think that the push for more interoperability can come at a later stage. I will let the players compete and innovate at this stage.
Thank you very much. The gentleman over there.
Hello, my name is Jerry Ellis. I'm from Dublin, Ireland. I've been a software engineer for 30 years, and I'm also blind. I had a question around accessibility, a little bit of background, and then a question really. The recent World Health Organization report on disability states that there are now 1 billion people on the planet with a disability. That's 1 in 7 people. That's their estimation. There, as of yesterday, 104 states, bodies, or countries, if you like, have signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and one of those states bodies is the European Union. The European Disability Forum reckons that there are 80 million people with disabilities in Europe. Okay, so there's a huge amount of people there. But currently you'll find that technology, in my experience, is more inaccessible now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And we want to ensure that that is not going to be compounded more by cloud computing. This is, if we can get access to technology, it means that instead of being forced to be dependent, we can become fully functional people in society, paying tax and so on, so on, so on. So my question is, how are we going to ensure that we can have an input at the European Union level, at consumer level, at, we say, these organizations, the European and American standards bodies which are meeting at the moment, FG Cloud, which is meeting in Seoul this week, and so on. How can we get in there to ensure that our needs are included? Thank you.
Okay, who wants to make it?
Yeah, well, as I said, there has been this public consultation that's open, well, it was open, excuse me, it closed on the 31st of August. And we are going to continue our consultations with SMEs, with consumer groups, etc. If there is a particular issue or particular concern from disabled groups, of which there are many different ones, relating to access or ensuring that, I don't know the technical aspects of cloud computing that would be particularly disadvantageous for disabled people, but there may well be. Just send them in to the European Commission. The public consultation, as I said, is closed, but you can consult the BEUC, it's an unfortunate name, the European Consumer Protection Association, or you send it to me, I will give you my card afterwards, or one of my colleagues who looks specifically after issues relating to e-inclusion. But if you send it to me, I will make sure it goes to the right place.
Thank you. Jeremy wants to say something.
Oh, no, sorry.
No. Any other reaction on this?
Hi, Steve Del Bianco with NetChoice. So when the panelists were discussing the notion of moving to an opt-in regime under privacy, there was a lot of heads nodding, but that's an area where, before we nod our heads, we should do some fact-based research. And in an 8-year study that University of Toronto had done in Europe, they studied 3.3 million individuals in 5 EU countries that did and 5 EU countries that didn't adopt a real stringent opt-in for even just tracking data. It's not personal data. Well, their conclusions were shocking. They said that for that body of people, that advertising effectiveness dropped by 65% because very few people opted in, and therefore the ads they got were generic ads. They weren't the least bit targeted. A 65% drop in effectiveness of ads from what seemed like a really good idea to require people to read and opt in, because people don't, well, they don't opt in. And that's the simple fact of it. So this is going to leave us with a cloud-based web services, which, well, they'll either have to require upfront that you get in, which is the same as opt-out, or they're going to have to start to charge people for what's free today. So let's be fact-based, and we have the facts before we head down that path. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If there is any reaction, otherwise we are, moving towards the end of this workshop. You want, Kasia?
Yes, because I think it's an immensely important issue. I do think you are right that at that point the opt-in revolution would be a real revolution, might be depriving us of important services, but there might be educational path, and I certainly it's not the state that should educate users, because users will not listen to the state nor to the European Commission, but we might imagine a different world that might happen as a result of educating users of how these things happen. That's one possibility. Another possibility is opening ourselves for alternative models of financing these services. Maybe users would prefer to pay $1, I'm making it symbolic, instead of giving privacy. We simply don't know that. So I think we need more debate on that rather than crossing that out immediately.
And don't ignore the small firms, because a large firm can probably induce people to cross the paywall, whereas startups almost never can come out of the gate charging people to go to their websites.
Right. Andrea wants, I think, to react. And
of course, it's a very expected effect. I mean, I know these when I talk about opt-in. I also think that this will change among users over time, because there's also some period of users need to learn there are advantages. I think that in locational services that use GPS, for example, this is already changing. A lot of people accept that their data used in order to let's say list what is available, the attractions that are available around you, what's surrounding you. It's typical things that. So the moment the advantages become clearer, I think also users will become more, let's say, ready to give a little bit of their privacy in exchange for better services and so on. I wouldn't start all the way from the other extreme. That's the main concern.
Thank you. There is a last comment here.
Yeah, a short question also. My name is Michael Littger, speak for the Federation of German Industry, and my impression is that it is quite difficult to talk about cloud governance, as it's a very abstract level, and actually I think cloud is only a tool, and this may be part of a problem. So if you look behind the tool, you have so different business models, from banking to cows to social media. So my question actually is, my question to you very shortly, did you ever think of changing or modifying the approach of this problem by looking on the business models first, and then defining or thinking about the particular needs for privacy or for responsibility, for liability, because I think the business has a great interest then to fulfill those liability and responsibility, and will and negotiate with the cloud providers on this. This would be a very market-driven approach, I admit, but maybe that is part of that very difficult debate about cloud governance. The question goes to you all.
I don't know if anybody's rather existential question. we may spend some time, but maybe we can discuss that at the margin of the workshop with the panelists. I would like, first of all, to thank all the panelists for their very disciplined interventions, for their views and very enriching conversation. I would like to also thank very much those that intervene, and maybe I will give the floor for 1 minute to each of you to ask you what you will bring back from this workshop home. Jeremy, I'm sorry. You're the first.
Surprise.
Oh dear. Well, no, I think one of the very resonant points for me was about the flood of terms and conditions in using cloud services that consumers can never be expected to read. In the UN guidelines that I mentioned, we do have a short point on writing terms and conditions in plain language, but still the volume of cloud services that a consumer may use may still render the number of the amount that they have to read unreasonable. So that's something we really do need to look at. So that's what I'll take away.
Thank you.
Well, I'll take home I think a good impression, because I've heard a lot of interesting perspectives. And for the first time, nobody has mentioned the different models, the software as a service, platform as a service. Nobody has talked about public, private, hybrid, community clouds, and so on. So maybe we can take this a step further, and we can say cloud computing has grown old now. It's grown a bit more mature.
Well, my general impression is it's no longer possible to discuss cloud computing as a topic. We simply go into so many areas. It would make more sense to recognize what a complicated landscape we face, and that might be also some kind of response to your intervention, that it's just a wrong way forward to start with the method. Maybe we start identifying the problems behind, and that will make the discussion easier. Thank you.
well, I take home all the comments that you've made. They're very interesting as usual, and it reinforces once again our knowledge that this is an extremely complicated and complex area, and we will do as well as we can with all our colleagues to make something useful for the future. Yeah.
Well,
Take this one.
from my side, not much more that has been said. I would say that in some way, something that I will take at home is that we should be a little bit more focused on each of the items as well. When we're talking about interoperability, and then maybe we are not saying the same, but we have to think about this item, this aspect related to freedom of choice and competition in the market. And then as far as it is linked to that, then maybe we should focus, or we have to. As far as not, maybe it's a moment of not put it as a priority, as you said. So I think we should, discuss each area in a deeper way. So from now on, the long list of items related to cloud computing should be breaking up in many different aspects.
I think I would say that my biggest takeaway from this particular panel is sort of a new sensitivity to the issues to SMEs and developers about talking loosely and fancy-free about interoperability. There's some very real concerns there, and a lot of times when we talk about that in the policy context, we talk about it too broadly without really thinking through the impact that could have on the next Google that's being developed in somebody else's garage.
Yeah, the real one thing that I would like to take from this is the open dialogue. I just love it, and just keep it coming, keep it on the table. Let's be honest, among ourselves about these issues, and it's the only way we can address them. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I want to applaud my